May 1951. Rory, Griffin and I were totally enclosed within a circle of 6 of them. Willie Bear there kept licking the side of his mouth with his thick tongue. He was stone heavier than us, older, much tougher. He his fist out to let Griffin see the pennies lodged between his clenched fingers. "That's what you're going to get hit with," he snarled. "And then you." Griffin went down at the first blow, his cut round the mouth. He was crying as Bear pulled him up for the next blow. Someone called "Cops!" and Bear said, "Everybody sit down, circle. Pretend to laugh at something." I pulled down with him as the police car moved slowly along the road. The window was down and the policeman was looking out. It was Sergeant Burke. "Griffin, don't you try to look round." Griffin still sobbing quietly and looking at the blood smear on his hand where he had wiped his mouth. I felt a stone rub the inside of my leg, snaffled, jumped up and threw it as hard as I could at the car, now almost past. The stone bounced on the car boot and struck the rear window. The car was in a whine and everyone ran, including Griffin. I stayed where I was. I couldn't move. The driver of the police car, a young constable, was upon me and Burke was leaning on the car. The constable grabbed my shoulder and might have cuffed me if Burke had not said, "Just bring him over here, constable." Burke heaved off the side of the car, strolled round to the back, looked at the window for the little chip mark the stone had made in the glass and the flake of paint it had loosened on the boot. "Now, why did you do a thing like that?" I said nothing. Although I had my back, I knew Bear and the others were watching from the top of the back field. "Beat the crap out of him!" shouted one. Burke up at them. "Nice friends you've got there. You want to give me their names? Constable, get out your notebook and write in it." Burke gestured towards them and brought his face close to mine. "I don't care, you understand, if you give me their names or not. I know every one of them. Willie Bear, Seamus Green, just write those names down, Constable. You, Sonny, I know you don't want to talk. I understand that. You can just nod your head. That's right, isn't it?" I nodded. That was cooperation enough for her. "Stooley, just like your uncle. Like what are ye?" shouted Bear. Burke clucked his tongue, opened the door and half ushered, half pushed me in on the black leathery seats. "Drive on, Constable," he said, getting in beside me. "Nice and slow up this street to the top, then turn left." Burke was smiling towards me and waving his notebook in the air. "Stop it here, Constable," he commanded, when we were passing the door of Bear's. He got out, knocked on the door, talked to Mrs. Bear, pointed toward the back of the car. She glared past him at me. He went 2 doors up to Green's house, did the same, then to the house of others from the gang, each time pointing towards me, sitting stranded in the back seat. We drove on. "This is your second time in a police car, isn't that right?" I nodded. Burke had been in charge the night they had searched the house for the pistol and interrogated barracks. "Well now, weren't we the easy-going men to let you go the last time? A gun in the house and him with a brother he had, his big brother Eddie. Did you ever wonder about that or ask him why? Even ask yourself why? For some must have wondered if you didn't." I said nothing. "Now, Bear, that big slag, he thinks he knows why. I'll do you one favour. I'll tell you this. Bear's got it wrong. I'd say your daddy has it wrong too. Maybe you should ask your mother now he's going over. Still, there you are. Once an informer, always an informer, that's what they'll say. And we'll see what comes out of the wash, eh? Off you go." He pushed me out before him and waved me away. I walked towards home. I could see no way out. No one would believe me. Or if they could see what had really happened, they'd still be doubtful. Because of Eddie. Wasn't that what Burke was saying? Yes, but also no. For Bear got it wrong, he had said. But how could my father be wrong about his brother and a policeman be right? And what did my mother know different? I'd have to run away, I thought. Chicago? The name ran ceaselessly in my head. My face felt as though it had set to a hard plaster mask, although I was crying inside, hard and dry, but crying. The first time I ran away after that, I got as far as the gangplank of the Bell Liverpool boat. Then my father and Tom appeared with a plain policeman and took me home in Tom's car. I had a shilling in my pocket and no raincoat. Liam was embarrassed by that. "No raincoat?" he echoed, disbelief. My mother never let up. "What could have possessed you to go running to those vermin? Have you no self-respect, Aid? And if you've none for yourself, have you none for the rest of us?" Thought my father's too ill to hear about this. The shame alone would finish him. A grandson of going to the police. I didn't go to the police. I threw a stone at them. Same thing in the circumstances. God alone knows why this sort of thing keeps happening. Worse. What sort of thing? The police, that sort of thing, you gom. My father asked me over and over to tell him in detail what Sergeant Burke had said. I didn't mention anything about Burke's reference to the earlier interrogation, or why they had let him go, or his Eddie or grandfather, or hinting I should ask my mother. Why didn't I a few punches from Barr and his gang? My father wanted to know this. It would all have been over now. Didn't I know what sort of people the police were? Did I no guts, no sense, no savvy, no shame? I was out of it. No one would play football with me. If I watched a game and kicked the ball back from the sideline, the player would hit the ball and wipe it before going on with a throw-in. So, I take a few punches. Now what would it take? I asked my father that. A bit of sense. A bit of courage. That angered me. Courage. To get battered. That's just stupidity. And what do you think this is, eh? What's this? Everybody has to suffer just because you couldn't face it. Right, but he was wrong too. One night he said it again. Somebody had insulted him that day on my account. Why hadn't I a few punches? Why did I have to bring the police back into our lives? Once not enough. First the gun, now this. Was there amiss with me? No, I told him, there's something amiss with the family. They were on top of us long before I was born. If he wanted to blame someone, let him blame Eddie. He hit me so fast I saw nothing. My shoulder felt hot and broken. I got up, hating him, although I could feel the tears coming as the pain increased through the numbness. I saw that Liam had closed his eyes and that my mother had stopped cutting the loaf. She had her back to us, and I saw the eye run the length of her spine down from her shoulders. Father looked at me, his face suddenly sad as well as angry. He was sorry he had hit me, but he wanted to hit me again. He stood up from his chair and said very quietly to my mother, touching her shoulder as though he were picking a loose hair from her dress, "I'm going to clip some of those roses. They're in bad need of it." He went out to the garden. "Bed," he said. "Bed, right now." "But I've had no dinner." "Bed this instant." I fled upstairs. July 1951. There was a pickaxe in the shed. I brought it out and drove as hard as I could into the soil near a rose bush. I drove it in again in a arc, and this time felt the point strike at roots. A time of the roots yielded more. I turned the pickaxe round in my hands at the blunter end. This time the root gave way. Then I went round both sides of the bush until it sagged sideways, and the petals were shining and all over the path and glinting weakly in the disturbed earth. I was soaked in sweat. There were 10 more rose bushes in a line down to the gate, and 5 more at the sun trap at the side of the shed. I would never have the strength to uproot them all. Back to the shed, and dragged out 2 bags of cement, threw them on the ground and pumped with the pickaxe in one powdery stroke. It was to tear the paper back, get a spade and shovel the white powder over each bush, beat as flat as I could with the back of the spade head. Only when I saw the cement bags lying flat and torn on the path did I stop to survey what I had. My father would be home in little more than an hour. In a panic, I grabbed the bags and folded them, thrust them back in the shed, took out the yard brush and began to sweep the petals and dry powder into the rose beds, thinking of the path clean at least. But as the nausea and dread died and I saw the broken roses hanging down in the choking dust, I gave up and stood there in a trance, hearing the front door open and my mother and the children babbling and running. They all came right out to the yard, shouting for my mother right behind them. "In the name of all that's sacred," she began, the rolling down her cheeks. "What have you done? What has possessed you to do such a thing?" "Ask Father, he'll know," I replied. I felt such fury then. I clumped angrily up the stairs, stripped, got into bed and lay there waiting. I opened my eyes. My father was looking at me from the door. He said nothing. He looked. He moved inside the room and closed it. I didn't want to look at him, but his eyes held mine, and as again my head followed him. So I know, do I? I nodded. Tomorrow and the day after and the day after that and every other that comes, you'll know. He walked out of the room, slamming the door behind him. I lay there. The others slept downstairs. I was perfectly still. I couldn't hear voices. I wanted desperately to go to the bathroom, but couldn't go down the stairs. Hot and twisted with discomfort, I somehow fell asleep. When I woke, I had to pull on and bolt to the bathroom through the kitchen and scullery. It was already mid-morning. To my astonishment, my father was there with my uncles and brothers. They stopped talking as I fled through the kitchen and silent until I had returned and gone up the stairs again. My mother was nowhere to be seen. I guessed she had gone over to Sister Katie, who lived only 2 streets away, to seek advice and comfort. I didn't know what to do, so I got back into bed, listened to the murmur of voices. The voice of men moving, a shout, and steps went down the backyard path. I got up and looked out on the ruined garden and saw men carrying in bags of cement from a lorry parked at the back gate. My father and uncles went out with them, and there was much heaving and clanking before they came in, swing-walking a cement mixer from one side to the other. All day long, as my father and Tom mixed cement, John spread it, while the other workmen uprooted and cleared the rose bushes ahead of them, raking the ground level as they went and throwing the dead bushes into the back of the lorry. By 3 p.m, they were finished. The yard got grey. They cased the wet cement in planks, cleaned up, and I think that was the first time my father ever made his work. I fell across the bed, still angry, or horrified, and half cried, half cursed myself to sleep. It was getting dark when I woke. Someone had touched me. I opened my eyes asleep, stared at the wallpaper and closed them again as my father bent over me. He kissed my hair. I slowly stiffened from the toes up. The moment I would cough or cry. But the bed rose as his weight lifted, and I rose lightly with it, like a wave lifting. He thought I was still asleep. He whispered to himself something I didn't catch. The bedroom door closed, and the stairs creaked their old familiar music as he went down. August 1951. Weeks my brother Liam said, "Go now and tell the bishop." "Do you get to see a bishop?" I asked. "For God's sake, go to the door of parochial house, ring the bell and ask the housekeeper if you could see his lordship on a personal matter of great urgency." "Then what?" "Then, idiot, the problem is to get yourself in the clear. I've about this. There's only one sure way. You have to be seen going into that police the priest to make your apology and be seen to come out again with him. No matter what happens inside, we'll start the rumours about Burke." "What rumours?" "Oh, go and get the priest in first." Bishop Coulter held out his hand. I went on knee and kissed the ring on his finger. He lifted his hand away. He waved me down into a chair. He sat at the end of the table 3 empty chairs away. "Now, my child, is this private matter you wish to see me about?" When I had finished telling him, he frowned a little and regarded me steadily, and I thought suspiciously. "You were very much at fault. I know that." "Yes, your lordship. The police have duties too." I nodded vigorously. "What exactly are you here for? What are you asking me to do?" "I wondered, your lordship, if you might suggest to me the best way to apologise to Sergeant Burke." "Simply go and do so, my child." "But the trouble is, your lordship, if I go to see him like that, everyone will think I'm farming again, that I'm going to the police to report names." "Well, can't you write to him?" I had never written a letter in my life. Only my mother wrote letters. No, notes to the grocer, the rent office, asking if we could have more time to pay, and would this sum of money serve in the meantime. I really liked that serve. I wondered where she had got it. It made handing the note over and waiting for the reading it much easier. It was better language than theirs. They would recognise it. Anyway, Liam had thought of a possibility too. But I would like the apology to be as public as their own. He drummed on the table with his fingers. I must say the sergeant's idea of justice in instance is not what I might call entirely Catholic. It's what we might call state justice. And your family has had its troubles before now, but these are matters. Better not gone into. I nodded my assent. Haven't I seen you at Mass these last weeks? Yes, Ship, I go every day. You are, I gather, doing excellently at school, as well as I can, your lordship. All very recent, though, not. Liam had prepared me carefully for this. 2 months and 1 week exactly, your lordship, since that incident with Sergeant. I found myself very much cut off by myself. Here I faltered. Liam advised me to get tearful at this bit, but there was no problem. I was tearful. My sorrow for myself was overwhelming. I found myself on my own, and no one would talk to me, and it was in the church, only there that I could be safe, and it was there that I found myself to talk. Talk? Yes, you have to talk to God. He gazed at me for a moment. Although I had tears in my eyes, I wondered about that last sentence. Too corny? And has been any, shall we say, consequence? Notable consequence? This talking to God? Consequence? I had to dither. I'm not sure, your lordship. All I know is that I want to. I feel at times I'd like to, you child, devote myself, think of devoting myself to the religious life. You feel you have a vocation, is that it? Yes, your lordship. I know I'm too young to think about this, but you are young indeed. Still, vocations are deeply rooted. You must nurture this, but make no decisions as yet. When you're older, you'll know. The conviction, when it comes, is impeccable. There was a pause. Leave this to me. I'll think about it. See me again, say, in a year. I shall watch your progress at school with interest. This cloud will lift. I bowed and left. A year from now? A year? Could it go on for a year? I shut my eyes in disbelief. It was almost 2 weeks later when the parish administrator, Father O'Neill, the bishop's man, called to the door. My mother was at the shops and my father at work. O'Neill was always in a hurry, always brutal. When I opened the door, he pointed at me and said, "Right, you're the boy, oh. You're coming this minute to the barracks to make an apology to Sergeant Burke. Put on your coat if you have one. Hurry." Liam was in behind me. He winked as I closed the door. Street, along the field, hurrying to keep up with O'Neill's long stride, looking straight at the men on the Blucher Street corner as they eyed me going past, saluted the priest, reaching the barracks at the end of the lower field where the Lecky road, round the vegetable plot at the side, up the gravelled path, in the open door. A constable was leaning on the counter, talking to a plain-clothes man who had a cigarette hanging from his lip. He looked narrowly through the smoke. "Ah," he said, "the Roman Catholic clergy. We're honoured." O'Neill glared at him. "For your information, there's no other kind of Catholic clergy but the Roman Catholic, and I didn't come here to the likes of you. Get the sergeant." He addressed this to the constable, but Burke had already come out of an inner room, his face set and surprised. "Father, good day to you. Come on in." In Burke's office, O'Neill sat down promptly, grabbed me by the elbow and held me. "What's brought you here, Father?" "What's brought me here, Sergeant, is a request from his lordship the bishop that this boy should be brought to apologise to you, and that I should hear if his apology is acceptable or if there's anything else you should want us to know. So if you're good enough to listen, he'll make his apology now." "Sorry, sir, for throwing a stone at your car and damaging it. That was the wrong thing." Burke smiled sardonically. "The trouble we have with that Limewood Street lot, Father, this fella, his older brother, and Barr, Moran, Harkin, Toner, you wouldn't have it. Indeed, I can't imagine it. There's some bad boys there. This one's not the worst of them, I'm told. Finally, he let go of my arm. I rubbed my elbow and stood there, not letting anything happen beside me. It's more than good of you, Father, to take up your valuable for a scamp like this one. I've plenty to do, Sergeant, as I'm sure yourself, and I can take it you're accepting this boy's apology. Burke hated this, but he had nowhere to go. I accept it. Of course I do. On condition he does nothing like that again. Only I walked out of the station and parted at the vegetable patch. He wagged it at me, told me that I was lucky his lordship had taken an interest in me. I nodded humbly and dumbly. O'Neill strode off and I looked up towards a crowd that had collected up the field to watch what was going on. They crowded round. What was all that about? Why was the in with the cops? The bishop sent O'Neill in to tell Burke for all his lies about me. I think Burke's going to be executed. The bishop's thinking about it. Either that or he'll have to be teared down the country. The bishop's written to the government about it. What did Burke say? O'Neill told me I wasn't to say anything more. He made Burke apologise and told me to leave it at that. Him and the bishop, he to it from here in. Later in the backyard of our own house, Liam said, "Next time Burke'll flatten you. Just stay out of his way and out of trouble. Maybe you should become a priest. Give us all peace." I shrugged off laughing and cartwheeled down the yard. Tonight I would play football. October 1952. My grandmother, my mother, had died when I was so small that I had to be lifted up by the side of the cot to kiss her cold, ennobled brow. Now grandfather was sick, propped up in a bed that seemed to enlarge as he got smaller. He seemed always to have been crying, so red and sore were his eyes. I was sent to live in the house 3 streets away to help Aunt Katie, who had left her own house, to look after him. "Just talk about football," Liam advised. "He used to run the Derry and District League. Or the priests, he's good on them, but now he's getting nervous, so he mightn't be as good as he used to be." Like Constantine. Great Uncle Constantine on my mother's side was the sole family heretic. He had been a know-all, we were told, a man who read too many books and disagreed with everybody, especially priests. In his 30s he started to read a notorious French called Voltaire, who was on the Catholic Index of Forbidden Authors, and soon after he hung a placard on the wall of his living room with the slogan, "Crush the Infamous One," painted in red on a black background. He said that was his and Voltaire's declaration of faith. Then he went blind, became ill and caved in by being restored to the bosom of the church before he died. I never saw Constantine, but he was a great name to us, the only admitted hick, whose final collapse was a melancholy propaganda victory for the priest. But it was grandfather who put me right on this. I used to sit at a table in his bedroom doing homework, while he sat there against us busily dying of boredom as far as I could see. He rarely spoke, but once he asked me what I was doing. "Just some French exercises." "French? What do you want to be bothered with French for? Who speaks French round here? Waste of time. Fit ye be studying Irish, your own language." "And who speaks Irish here?" "Frankie Meenan, Johnny Harkin, that's 2, and more. And look at what the French did to Constantine. Lost his sight. Then they say his soul. Constantine, sure he died a Catholic." "He did not. He didn't. He died a heretic. Refused to see the priest and died holding that French book across his chest that they tried to get off him. I heard different. Of course you did. They cooked up the story not to give a bad example. But old Con, he's down there with all the other atheists. God rest him." At that he laughed. So did I. I was so pleased for Constantine that I was shocked at myself. Then I wanted to ask grandfather, "But what about you? Are you going to hold out?" But couldn't bring him to do it. Besides, he had suddenly gone sombre again. My mother came up regularly to see him, as did her brothers. She spent long in the bedroom with him, while I lay on the sofa downstairs reading, wondering how long he would die and when I could get back to my own house. She came one day, pale, and sat heavily in the armchair opposite. I looked sideways at her. Her face looked broken. Hands gripped one another in her lap. I asked her was anything wrong, but she shook her head and tightened her lips in a way that reminded me of grandmother's mouth. It was easy to know that something had been said between her and her father. She began to cry, and I got up to put my arm around her and soothe her. She cried and cried, the whole top half of her body shuddering. She groaned, bent over as though her stomach ached, straightened up and looked me straight in the face, her tears Eddie, she said, dear God, Eddie, this will kill us all. His name boomed in my ears and my nervous system jumped and stood out before me like a constellation. Eddie! Shh, she whispered, shaking her head. Not a word, not a word. Don't listen to me. After a bit she straightened up, went out to the scullery and bathed her face. Her eyes were still red, and told me I wouldn't have to stay much longer, that they'd come into the hospital for treatment and that he'd never come out of it alive. He's beginning to wander a bit in his mind. Pay no attention to what he says, and don't, whatever you do, don't repeat it. Not even... She went off. That was the beginning of our long trouble. I stayed there, grandfather upstairs, the house darkening. Aunt Katie had returned, my heart haunted by tremors.